everyone, and welcome back to Behind the Mask. I'm one of your co-hosts, EJ, and Lori.
Hello.
And T.
Hey, everyone.
Is joining me today. This is episode 17, which we're calling The Mask of Perfection, and I think Lori is going to know the most about this one.
Wow.
Because I don't go for perfect at all. Anyways, just a friendly reminder that anything discussed in this podcast is not to be used as a diagnosis or replacement for conversations with your own doctors, therapists, psychologists, or other medical professionals. Yeah, perfectionism is and going to be an interesting topic. I know my OCD makes me try to be perfect sometimes, but yeah, it doesn't usually get there. So we're going to have an interesting conversation, I think.
Yes, I recently was having a conversation with my counselor because I'm trying to work on some of these things, and I remember kind of, confessing to him, if you will, or saying, every time you say the word failure, it is like nails on a chalkboard. And he was like, really? Failure, failure, failure. I was like, you're a brat. And he's like, we're going to say it over and over again until it's not nails on a chalkboard for you. And I was like, oh, wow, this could take a while. But T and I were also, just recently chatting. And unless you live under a rock right now, between the last two Olympics, it's been very, very, very obvious that within our culture, perfection it's a problem. It's of course, it's unrealistic expectations. It's so many things. I was just watching the Olympics last night, the Winter Olympics, and there were a couple of different scenarios that were really, really disturbing to me. One of them, I mean, you've got the obvious one, Camila Valieva, and she broke down into a million pieces last night. She could not handle the pressure. There were many people in the world who, I'm probably one of them, who felt she shouldn't even have been at the Olympics. We're not going to go into all that. We're going to stay on perfection. But she was and is still the number one skater in the world. But she's 15 years old. And she literally cracked under all the pressure. And just she couldn't finish, and she just continually fell, and there were so many issues. Because of all of this, all of the other athletes were disrupted, and her two teammates, which won the gold and the silver, Alexandra, that's the one I struggled with the most. And I think I struggled with it the most because I saw myself in it. She didn't even want to go to the platform. And in the beginning, everyone thought that she was crying or upset for her teammate. Guess what? It wasn't about that. She had done, and no other woman had done this, 5 quads in her routine. This is like inhuman for women.
Right.
But she has been known to have said, there's nothing but gold. If it's not gold, it's losing. And this is where I struggled, because I kind of feel that way. If I don't win, if I'm not at the top, then what am I doing? I've struggled in my relationship with God because of this. There's this, I'm supposed to be striving for perfection, except I just kind of forget the word striving. And I just hear perfection. Right. And I'm like, I'm supposed to be there right now, yesterday, I know I've shared with you too previously, I grew up in a household where C meant you were really trying, and that was, okay, it was acceptable. And A was expected. But a B meant you were lazy. And there was a curse word in front of that. But a B was, you were lazy. You shouldn't have had the A. You just didn't work hard enough. And so I know that I didn't just come up with all this on my own, that a lot of that is trauma and built in and all of that. But I really did see myself in Alexandra last night, because I can be that way. I would never on the outside, especially as an adult, show you how totally upset I was at not winning or not beating or not. And it's weird because my competitiveness isn't so much with other people. It's often with myself. And I'm sure, T, you're going to tell us some psychological stuff that goes along with that. But the most disturbing thing happened while I was watching the beginning of the Olympics with my grandson. Really hurt, because I realized that he's listening to the adults around him. And so Michaela Schifrin doing her skiing thing, she's #1 in the world. And I was telling David, I'm like, wow, this is our girl. She's a rock star, And I said, she's the best in the world. And she fell. And his response was, well, she can't be the best in the world. She just fell. Oh, it broke my heart. Like, I was like, oh man, we are teaching him that. And I was like, okay. And, I told him, I said, no, David, that's not true. I said, she's still the best in the world. She just had a fall. It's okay. She'll get up. And then, so last night I posted as we're getting ready for this, I posted her response. Michaela's response to a lot of the negativity and stuff that she's been dealing with, where she goes, when you fall, you just get up and you get up and you get up and you just keep getting up. Mm-hmm. And that's what my counselor has been trying to get me to see, is that failure should not be looked at as a bad thing, but as an opportunity, or for growth, for another chance to try again. And it's very difficult for me to see. So I'd love to dig into this some more. So T, give us some wisdom here.
Well, I think we need to cut the word failure. Failure implies that the battle or the whatever it is you're doing is done. Like there's nothing left to do. So it's an end term, whereas it's more like it's a process. So take failure out of your vocabulary.
I like that idea.
Yeah. Well, it makes sense, because it means you can't improve.
Mm-hmm. It means it's done.
Yeah.
And it's very, very little, it's not very often that a situation is done. There's usually opportunity right. to improve, to get better, to continue. Mm-hmm. So rather than failure, we can maybe change the word to opportunity.
Yeah, I like that idea.
And I also think we need to define what our expectations are, and are they inner expectations or outer expectations? Is this a pressure we're putting on ourselves, or a pressure we're putting on from someone else, or that's being put on us from outside of ourselves? And then we have to evaluate, is that interpretation important? Is that person's expectation important enough to allow ourselves to feel that kind of pressure from it?
So, right. So, I identified earlier that a lot of my perfectionism driven things I felt like, and I've said, perfectionism was beaten into me. How do we change that? I was so disturbed when I heard say what he said. I mean, but again, I don't think he was speaking necessarily for himself. He was reflecting the attitudes and the words of the adults within his life.
Right. Well, and that's just it, the attitudes and the words. And so when we need to make a change, that's kind of where we go to, is how do we define it? So again, the word perfectionism or being perfect, what does that even mean to be perfect? And why is that something we are working towards? Because again, that's limiting.
It's very limiting.
So, Lori, what exactly did he say again?
He said, well, she can't be the best. She just failed. She just fell. And I was like, oh no, she can still be the best. What happened to her didn't define her career.
Right. Okay. So I guess what I'm thinking is I don't disagree with him, because I feel like that's all he's seen of her. And if I walked into an opportunity where I'm seeing somebody for the first time and everyone's like, oh, she's the best, she's the best, she's the best, and the only witness I have is her falling on her first run, I don't remember if it was her first run or not, but that's what my witness would be of her. I'm like, well, she must not be the best. On the other hand, what we should be teaching him is, yes, she fell, but just to make it to the Olympics, she has to beat a whole lot of other people. So she may have fallen here, but she's beat a lot of other people to get there. And to be at the Olympics is a huge thing. Yeah. And that's just one example. So I don't disagree with what he said, because if that was my first witness of her, because I know personally, I've seen Michaela Schifrin do awesome, but when she's fallen, and then we know through the Olympics, she's fallen numerous other times. I'm like, this year was just not her year, but just to make it to the Olympics means she beat out a lot of other people to get there. So what we should be teaching them is, you don't know the whole story about where she's at.
Well, it's interesting that you say that, because one of the announcers had brought up the fact that she actually hasn't fallen in almost 2 years of racing.
Right.
It's been more than 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
And so she fell. And then
Right.
she proceeded to fall in the next, 4 events. And it really hasn't been her Olympics. But,
right.
I think about Simone Biles. I think about Michael Phelps. Naomi Osaka and Schifrin, they all come to mind. They're all very star athletes. And something a friend of mine and I were discussing on Facebook last night was that part of the pressure that we put on these kids, and T, you'll be able to talk about this one a little bit, but some of them, this Kamala is 15 years old, and they have been, there used to be a higher age, and then we started getting younger and younger and younger. And how can they be held responsible for these things? And their frontal lobe isn't even finished being developed,
Right.
I was like, because of course Kamala's surrounded by all this possible doping and all this stuff from the people around her.
Well,
and
yeah.
people are like, she should be held responsible.
Well,
And
yeah.
But some people are saying, but how do you hold a 15-year-old responsible for her team? Should have been there. Her coaches should have been there. The people around her should have been loving and protecting her and taking care of her and mentoring her rather than doping her.
Instead, they taught her that perfection is the goal and failure is not an option.
That's right. And that's what they taught her instead. And she broke. Mm-hmm. And she broke in front of cameras of the whole world. What a stage to be on, to have that happen. The mother in me even you, EJ, like kind of like an aunt, right? You feel for these kids. You just, it's heartbreaking, the pressures that we put them in. And, like we were saying, the frontal lobe's not done being developed. So we see this happen in high school settings. We see this happen in, going into college, so many people drop out. There's suicide, there's all these things. Why are these things so prevalent?
Because their frontal lobe isn't done cooking. And how it finishes cooking is what we put into it. So that's even though it's not done developing until you're 25, in your mid 20s, in that time, up until that time, where it's going to end up being, it depends on what's getting put into it. So if what we're putting into our teenagers is these expectations that are too much for even us adults who, well, I'd like to assume my brain's done cooking. I can't be perfect. How come I can expect that of these kids who don't even have that capacity yet? And because they don't have that capacity, they can't plan. They can't say, if I do this now, I'm going to get this result in 5 minutes, in 10 minutes, in a year. And so we're putting them in these scenarios that require that. So when they have to make a decision, do I take this substance to do better so I can meet the expectations of others? They don't understand the long-term results of that. So when they have access to these things without any guidance, they're going to make poor decisions. That's just the nature of it. And so it is a sticky wicket, and it's really hard, especially when us adults even struggle with it. And I think something that kept popping into my head while you were talking, Lori, is perspective. What is our perspective of the situation? And so, and part of perspective is how we define things. And I think that's where we need to be at with our kids and ourselves, is learning how to redefine certain things and be realistic and use our critical thinking skills. Again, something teenagers don't really have a lot of access to. They're starting to, but it's a trial and error for them. Which also reminds me of this too, is that someone may be the best at something, so for the moment, but that's why there's records, because people come along and beat a record. So Michael Phelps, I don't follow the Olympics very well, but I do know of him a little bit because he was setting record after record after record. So he was the best, but someone else is going to come along and beat those records, and then they'll be the best. Does that mean he's no longer the best? So again, I think a lot of pressure comes in the words we use.
Right. And I think about, you were talking about how can we expect these young people to be perfect if we as adults can't even be perfect doing the same thing. I think about all those dance moms and stage moms who are like, my child is the best, she should be front and center, and the kid might not, be. And it's like, could you be up there in front and center? Like, some of these parents, it's like, really, y'all? Like, if you can't even get up there and like salsa dance, then why are you screaming that your kid's the best? Why are you putting this pressure on them if you can't even do it? It takes practice, it takes trying. And it drives me crazy when I see stuff like that. Like, there was this entire series about dance moms. I'm like, really? I'm like, that just shows how crazy these parents are about demanding that their kid is the best. So it's like, the kid might be at the time, but you don't have to put that pressure on the kid, because that's all they're going to be thinking about through the rest of their life is, I have to be perfect. I have to be perfect.
It's interesting you say that. I've often said that weddings and funerals bring out the best and worst in people. Yeah. There's a reason you have a show called Bridezillas. There's a reason there's a movie called Monster-in-Law. There are these unrealistic expectations for these big events, for these times within our lives, right? Because we can't all be, Michael Phelps and Michaela Schifrin and Kamala Vieva, we want the perfect dress, the perfect ceremony. We want to come up with the most unique way to, we don't want to just have a unity candle anymore, because everyone does that. So I got to do something different, and what's my theme going to be, and and did I have enough of my family's traditions in there? And, I used to, when I would sit down with a bride and groom, I'd be like, okay, listen, I know you're not going to believe me. And I said, but I'm going to say it over and over again. And then the day of the event, as things are happening, I'm going to want you to remember that this is your day, not anybody else's. And I'm here to make what you want happen. you know.
Right.
And the other thing I would always say is, why can't I apply this to myself? I would always tell them, it is not if, it is when. Something's going to break. Somebody's going to forget something. It's going to happen. Happens every single time. There's no such thing as a perfect wedding. It just doesn't happen. A relative's going to get sick. Somebody may even die, for goodness sakes. And so I try the entire process getting this bride and groom ready for this big day of absolute perfection, that I'm trying to set them up for success so that they wouldn't freak out when these things did happen, you know. And maybe I can't apply it to myself because I was the person in the background trying to make it perfect. I don't know, but I can't seem to apply that same grace to myself as I can to someone else. But T, any thoughts on that?
So I'm hearing a lot of contradictory ideas and thoughts in that, like the combination of best but unique. How can you be unique but the best? Because the best implies that you're comparing to everybody else who's doing the same thing, but in the same breath, you want to be unique. You want to be your own person. So it also ends up coming back down to what is best for me may not be best for the other person. What I need may not be what another person needs. And so understanding our own selves and being okay with it. So at one time I struggled with some OCD traits as well, because I felt like my life was out of control, and it was a way to control. So learning what's motivating a behavior, what's motivating how you view yourself, etc., is really important. And so I started redefining it. And so now when something doesn't go the way it's supposed to, or I look around and things aren't the way I would like them to be, or I trip over something, because that's, pretty, well, that's kind of like, if I stand up, I'm going to trip. But anyway, I just laugh and say, well, that's part of my charm. So I'm redefining it. I'm saying, look, I'm not perfect, but that's part of what makes me perfect.
Right.
That's part of what makes me who I am. And is that acceptable to me? Because if it's acceptable to me, it is likely to be acceptable to other people.
Yeah. And maybe that's my problem. I never thought about it myself being acceptable to others. So good call.
Yeah, OCD definitely has its issues.
It's exhausting.
It is. Yeah. Dealing with it for so long, the stressors that it comes with it, and it's like it's like if I could just throw it all away, I would. But there's so many things I can't seem to stop. And then it's like the getting to, or it's hard to even sometimes find the causes of it. I mean, it took me like a year of counseling to really figure out why I was having such a problem with it. And it was because I was in a job that I was considered a shift leader, and I was the one that was blamed for some stuff that didn't happen the previous shift, even though I had nothing to do with it. It wasn't my responsibility to take care of, but because I was a shift leader, I was, so my boss was trying to make me be the perfectionist. And when I failed at that, because I didn't take care of it and deal with it, the next day we had an inspector come in and they got written up for something that I should have been in charge of the night before. So again, the stress of having to be perfect in that situation is what caused my OCD, because then I was trying to be perfect at everything because I didn't want to fail again.
You didn't want to fail again, and you didn't want anybody else to be responsible for that sense of failure. So like they were held accountable for something that was perceived as your failure. And so if you do everything right, not only will you be okay, but others around you will be okay.
Yep.
And so sometimes identifying that and understanding that some things are just out of our control and that we can always try to do better.
Yeah.
But because you didn't have the opportunity to sort of take that in and process it through that, your brain decided, oh, well, we're just going to attach this meaning to that. And so to address that, because we don't like this dysregulated feeling we're feeling, we're going to make sure it never happens again. And so we don't always see that coming. And
Right.
it can result in that anxiety, and because that's what OCD is, a type of anxiety in my, so it's a tough one and it's exhausting.
It is.
So T, you and I had kind of fleshed out some notes of, okay, what do we do with all this? What are some positive things? How can we deal with this in this crazy perfectionist society that we currently are surviving in?
Well, I think the first and foremost thing is to understand that what you have control of. So I only have control of my thoughts, my actions, my emotions, my reactions to others. I can't control what other people do, think, or say. And so if I can find an acceptance in that, that's a piece of it. And then, as we've been kind of talking about, is how we define things. So that's a part of what we have control of, is how we define it. And even though we do have to behave a certain way in society in order to be acceptable and to continue our jobs and to, do these different things, we still have a responsibility for ourselves within that. And the other piece that I often work with clients on is, why do we give others the power to define who we are? And so when I get clients who are like, well, so and so said this, and they accept it as if it's some sort of mantle that they have to wear. And I'm like, well, consider the source. Why are they the authority on who you are and how you are? And oftentimes people kind of sit back with that and are like, why do I give them the power? And some people just automatically get that power because they're our parents or our siblings or our spouse. But I don't know. I just don't think we need to define ourselves by what others say. It can help inform us on how we're doing, maybe. But again, consider the source. The person who's looking at you saying, you need to do better, you need to be perfect, but they themselves are not holding the line on that, then why would I even care what they think?
Reminds me of that scripture, there are none without sin. All have fallen short. We've all sinned and fallen short of glory of God, because that puts us on an equal playing field. It's no one person is better than the other at all for any reason, no matter whether they're talent or gift or whatever.
Well, isn't that interesting? No one's better than someone else, and yet we're trying to achieve to be the best.
Yes. Well, like I said, this is the current culture and society that we live in.
Yeah, go ahead, Tina.
I was just going to say, the culture is only the way it is because we've allowed it to be that way. The culture is built on us, on the individuals coming together and deciding what is acceptable and what's not. So to make the change, it has to start with us, individuals.
Well said.
Yeah, I was thinking, this happened a couple of years ago. I was at an event and I was early, and it was a friend's birthday party, and I can't remember exactly how it came out, but I was like, well, do you need any help in the kitchen? Just with things, because they were still prepping things. So they're like, oh yeah, can you put together the banana pudding? And I said, oh, I thought somebody else was bringing one. And they're like, well, yeah, but we want another one. And so I can cook and I can bake, but I'm no like Julia Child. I'm not gonna plate it like a French cuisine. I'm not it's gonna taste the same, but it's not gonna look maybe pretty. And they've given me this box of vanilla wafers, and this is a banana pudding. So, there's cut up bananas, there's vanilla wafers, there's vanilla pudding. And when I went to put it all together, I did it the way I've always done it, which was just like the vanilla wafers were broken up anyway. So I'm like, well, I'm not going to try and like lay them out. So I just kind of like sprinkle them on the top or on the bottom. And the person later was like, yeah, so this was like days later, they're like, yeah, so I was like, well, I'm just putting it together. And they had tried to like offer to like, tell me how to do it. And I'm like, don't worry about it, it's no big deal, because that's me. But then they were like complaining later because the other person who brought one, had it all like every cracker was laid out. I'm like, well, if you wouldn't have bought the reduced, the reduced on sale ones because they'd been thrown around and broken, then I would have maybe done that. But to them, I didn't do it right. I didn't do it perfectly. So it didn't look appealing, but I'm like, it tasted the same. Seriously. And I'm like, that's me. Like, I'm not gonna just bend over and like break my back for something that people are going to eat and taste the same, because I like the rustic look. I'm not going to no French restaurant and having them like curl the little lemon strand the right way to, who cares? And that's again, yeah, I know Lori cares. And that's the thing. Like, I know, and this was for somebody else completely, but it was just like, I could give a rat's behind what it looks like if it tastes the same. But then again, like, of course, I'm not going to just throw it on there and make a mess. But it was just one of those moments where you're like, well, obviously they have different tastes than I do, and that's never going to change.
And that's what I'm talking about. So what you did is you're like, okay, I hear your feedback. That's the way you like it. Doesn't change how I like it.
Right. And it was in one of those situations where they were 2 hours behind in all the stuff they were doing. They had so many things they wanted done. People were starting to show up. Food needed to be prepared, and they'd asked me to help. So I helped. And I'm like, if you didn't want me to help in the first place, then maybe you shouldn't have asked me.
Right.
Because I offered and you said, yes, please do this. And so I did.
So what you did is you considered the source. You're like, why would I take in what you have to say as constructive criticism on something I did when you weren't, you weren't the authority in the situation because you weren't setting a good example.
Right. And if I would have, if they would have come over and offered to help me while I was doing it, I would have been like a little more open to their criticism. But because they were off doing 50 other things and they left me to my own devices, you don't come back halfway through the project and be like, oh, well, it needs to be done this way. Because I'd have been like, well, here you go. Here's the spoon, the spatula, and everything. Figure it out yourself. Which I was very close to doing.
Right.
But yeah. So how do we get past all this? How do we go from the demands and the stresses of trying to be perfect, or the force of being like perfection around us? How do we walk past that? Like, what do you guys do? Like, I mean, what are you learning, Lori? Because this is a new territory for you.
Yeah. I'm doing lots of journaling and processing. Yeah. I was thinking while you were talking, and I know you and I've had this conversation before, because I remember you helped me with a wedding, and I was really afraid that I was going to hurt you. Because when I'm on a mission, really just please get out of my way. I don't, in my selfishness, if you will, in my desire to be perfect, I would have never asked you to help. I'd been, thank you, no. Because I wouldn't want to get frustrated with you later when you didn't do it like I wanted you to do it. Mm-hmm. So unless I had the time to properly train you, and I would have tried to, I think for me, in my mind, setting myself up for success, I would have had people in line to help beforehand, and I would have made sure they all knew what the expectation was, and then I would, so I normally, if I get that last minute offer to help, I'm like, oh, you're so gracious and you're so sweet, but no, thank you. Because I know that I have this level of expectation and perfection in my mind about what it's supposed to look like. And there's no way that I would expect you to know what's in my mind. So I'd be like, thank you, no. And I just go about doing it myself.
I'm trying to think which wedding you're talking about, because we did two. Well,
Yeah, when
the first one or the second one?
The second one, because the first one, I think I really just needed like a helpmate in my mind. But the second one, like you and I had agreed to kind of do the whole thing together from beginning to end. And so I just, I saw you getting ready to talk there, T. Go for it.
So here's the thing. What I'm hearing, okay, and in my own experiences with you, Miss Lori, is that your idea of perfection, and that nothing else, like I could come up with a great idea, but if it's not your idea, it's not perfect.
And it's interesting that you say that. It's only in the moment. Like if you came to me before that, I'd have been fine.
Right.
Like, but in the moment, I don't have time to process that.
Exactly.
And I don't want to deal with it. So I just think
Right. Right. But it can come off to the person that you're speaking to as if, oh, so you're the only expert.
Yes.
And therefore, I'm not ever gonna, like, let's say, you know, the outcome of that, if I wasn't careful with my own self, the outcome of that could be, if I heard that, it would be, oh, so she's the only expert on wedding planning, and if I had any interest in it, I might as well put that away because it will never measure up to hers. That's what I'm hearing. And
you would have got that from me, yeah. And so I've been called many names.
So that's kind of coming back to understanding ourselves and understanding our own values, our own limits, our own passions, and not letting someone else determine that for us. And so, and then being aware of how that can translate to others. Not everybody's going to see things the same way we do. And so having that open communication. So for example, recently, I sort of vomited all over Lori because I was tired. I had all these expectations on me, and I was scrambling to try to meet them all. And Lori sprang something on me that I wasn't expecting, and I was not ready for it. I was just exhausted. I had my tank was empty. It was completely empty. And I responded in a way I would normally never respond. But because I didn't have time, like you said, Lori, I didn't have time to process and kind of settle things and say, okay, I have a say and I have a limit. And because I was stuck in that mode, I was translating everything through that filter. And so I had taken something you had said out of context and focused on that. Like, I was like, what? You don't get to say that about me. And you're like, I wasn't, you know.
I didn't say that.
That's not what I said. So we do have to leave room for repair.
Yes.
I think is sort of what kind of comes out of that for me, is how we define things, how we define ourselves, how we define others. And the words we use are important. The Bible even says that the words we say are super important. Yes. So always be aware of that. Say nothing out of hand. You know what you're saying, because that's important. But then also be leaving room to fix things, because nothing is perfect except for God. Right. Nothing is perfect. But I also want to throw something in there. I think God did that on purpose, because some of the most beautiful things in this world are not perfect. As a matter of fact, we reject things that are too symmetrical. We tend to reject things that are perfect, like our eye, what we find pleasing. Yep. If it is completely perfect, we will likely reject it. What we find beautiful, what we find attractive, typically has imperfections in it.
I think that's why I don't like black and white photos, because black and white photos to me seem perfect. They're one color, two colors, or a tone of, black
Mhm.
and white, and there's no life to it to me.
Mm-hmm.
So
There's
I
no
can look at,
subtlety.
and then, but and then for me, for color is like there's life to it. There's differences. The colors may be crazy, like they might not look matched, but if that thing was in black and white, like I'm like, yeah, that's just boring. But then I see life in, whereas I know Lori loves black and white photos because there's no way for the colors to be mismatched because it's black and white.
It's interesting though, because the opposite for me, if I'm looking at a color photo, it's like my eye goes, and I think you hit upon it, T. My eye goes, I can tell if you photoshopped it, and it's not natural.
Oh, yeah.
And if it's not natural, it's not going to get my vote, and it's not going to get my attention. I literally dismiss it. I would rather see it raw and unnatural than to see it photoshopped to perfection. I actually don't like most of the covers of magazines and things like that because I know how much they're manipulated and it's not real.
Right.
Well, and my mind rejects that.
Yeah. And I'm not really talking about like Photoshop photos because those are complete. I just mean like if you go to like an event or something and you take a black and white photo and then side by side of a color photo of the exact same thing, I would gravitate towards the color because there's more options for like life to that. Whereas black and white to me just seems like too pristine, too dainty, too perfect. And
it's perspective.
It is. And so like Tina was saying, we're, are oftentimes when we see perfect things, we gravitate away from them because it's like we can't process that. Some people can, some people can't. I don't understand how somebody could look at a table that's spread out and have like everything's, all the place settings and then see the one fork that's in the wrong spot. And I'm like, flip out. Like I'm like, I would just don't care. Like, but 6 miles away, there's going to be somebody who can see that one thing out of place. And it would probably
I don't know
be
who
Lori.
that would be.
And it would probably be Lori.
If I saw everything in place, I'd walk by and push something out of place.
I would too.
You guys are so. Why are we friends?
No, the question is, how are we friends? And another thing, you brought up the wedding, and I know which one you're talking about now. And it was funny because there were so many things you were trying to implement, and like the bride and groom specifically, like were totally like opposite. So I was like, I had to kind of ground you, like, hey, tone it down because they're not interested. And things that they did come at us with later, like I had to kind of help you process through because you're like, what do they want to do this for? And it was and I can understand where you're coming from, and I think as a business standpoint, you at one time had a business as doing weddings, so you had a way of doing things. You wanted to be professional. You wanted things to look clean and sleek and taken care of.
Reputation.
Reputation. So, fast forward to you no longer have that business. You still have the experience. So you kind of have gone from, not doing it professionally now to just kind of helping some friends out here and there. And then, this person had the opportunity and, the groom happened to be somebody I knew. So there was a reason why you were like, yeah, let's have her help, and I think it was definitely eye-opening for me just to see the process, but I also wanted to help with, the wedding to learn the process. Because it's not just that you start planning one day and like a week later you have the wedding. It's a process that I hadn't really had a ton of experience with planning big events. So I was learning from you, but I was also learning what to do and what not to do. And I do know through that process that we did find a lot of differences in our opinions and stuff, but in the end it worked out great. You know, the bride and groom were happy, the guests were happy, everybody had a good time. And I think that's when I say, how are we friends? It's because they say, don't say they complete you. Well, it's like, I balance you out, or Tina balances you out, because we help you tone down the perfection, and we kind of maybe strive to be a little more perfect sometimes than we would maybe normally be. Which I think is, because aiming for perfection is not a bad thing. Trying to be better is not a bad thing. Striving, practicing, training. And we were talking about the Olympics earlier. None of those are bad things. It's not like you're going to do something a certain way and it's never going to get better. Because like Tina said, if we say failure, it's the end, but it's not. If we continue to strive. And for those who are Christians, we're striving to be Jesus, because he was the perfect example, and he's the only perfect example we have. And
Yes.
if people, continue to practice and try, they may never reach that, but at least they have a goal in mind.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I think that, you had asked me earlier, what are some of the things that I'm doing? So I'm journaling.
Mm-hmm.
In the moment, it was really nice. I'm kind of glad you brought up our little scenario that happened the other night, T, because for me, it was a massive learning process, in that way sooner than I would have before, I was able to identify, oh, this has nothing to do with me. I was like, oh, thank you, God. Like, I'm on the other end. And if you could have seen me, you would have been like, light is dawning on Marblehead. Like, I realized, oh, she's not mad at what I said. This is totally a different animal, and I don't think that I would have been able to recognize that just a few years back. I'd have been
Spinning.
I would have been spinning, and I would have been hurt, and I wouldn't have been able to process it as quickly and easily as I did. And when I was talking about it with my counselor, because I was sharing with him, I was like, he goes, that's a really good job, Lori, And I was like, I know, right? That was good. But I don't think I would have been able to do that just a couple years back. Yeah. So it was great to see some growth, and some ability to let it go and not take it personally. I think that is probably one of the biggest things that I'm learning, is that, first of all, it's not just about me. I know there's some great songs about that, but in reality, it isn't just about me. And rarely, and more often than not, what someone is going through, you're just an innocent bystander, a cog in the wheel, so to speak. And if we can recognize that, it makes our responses so much more grace-filled, so much more forgiving, so much, and we can get less easily offended, hurt, and find a need to defend ourselves, and do all these things. So I would say that's an area that I'm really growing in with this whole not perfectionism thing. It's really hard for me to even say those words together.
I think something I would add is that trying to recognize and to capture and then to avoid all or nothing thinking. So that's anything that ends with a T, pretty much. So not trying to be you can try to be the best. I like that concept, the trying part. But like, if I fail, there's nothing else I can do. If I'm not the best, there's nothing else I can do. I'm a failure because I'm not the best. So it's it's very limiting thinking when we think in the all or nothing, and trying to capture that and understand that very rarely is it all or nothing. And we can have so much more quality and quantity, whatever it is we're looking for. It's a lot more likely we'll achieve it if we stay out of that realm. And it creates a distortion within ourselves when we have that all or nothing thinking. And so we don't like it. Our brains don't like it. Our right down to our cellular level, we seek center. So everything's always trying to get back to center, whether it's our thinking, the cells in our body, the world around us. Everything's trying to attempt that. And there's a term, and it's escaping me right now, but it's almost there. I almost have it.
It is early in the morning.
Yeah, and I was thinking. Oh yeah, it is. And I was thinking about that. You're talking about everything's trying to go back to center. It's like a pendulum, like a pendulum swings both ways. Its goal is to get back down to center, but then if those the little ball thing that you sit and like it has like 6 of them hanging there, and you hit one and they bounce back and forth, and like it falls back down to center, and then it hits something else, so then the other one gets off kilter, and the next thing you know, they're both back and forth. And so we just kind of have to figure that out. So I know for me, like setting aside like boundaries, like especially with that situation of that job where I was put under a lot of stress, like getting myself out of that situation was a huge help. I ended up having to quit that job because I couldn't do it anymore. And so that was like in a way a boundary. Like I'm like, nope, I can't do this. And there's been times where people are like, oh, well, if you know so much about working in a deli or working doing this, like get another job doing that. And I'm like, no, I can never do that for this reason, like because I know that will come back. And I like that you have your boundaries in the way of like, I don't know, like I feel like Tina was saying, like maybe if you have something that's in a perfect alignment, like I should go move it, like like it just yeah, I don't know, it's funny. And then like you've been posting pictures online of like chef plating and stuff, and I'm like I just want to go like pile it on there in a different way just to like irritate you.
I'm so glad that you can't. That would be so disturbing.
Right. But it's not that I want to irritate you, but it's to help you like that one more step of like finding less perfection.
I do it just because I just enjoy it.
I will say in reference to that in particular, so you have identified that that's not important to you, that it doesn't, but I did those things many, many, many years for everyone else but myself. So for me, it's not about the perfect plate so much. It's about that it's okay to treat myself in the way that I deserve, or that I recognize as feeling special, or because I would love to pay a chef. If I won the lottery, I would hire a chef. Like I would never cook, and they would make me beautiful plates, and I would be in heaven, because that to me is especially important. And it's not for me this time with this thing in particular. It's that it's okay for me to want that, to desire that. And I'm trying to embrace that and say, because of my surgery and everything I've done, I only get so much, And so I'm like, okay, how do I make this not look like one little half cup of food? How do I make it look bountiful? Well, you do that by chef plating.
Right.
You know, you do that by spreading it out and making it look beautiful. And then when you're going through, I don't know, it just seems like this really beautiful process, and it
Right.
seems bigger and better and makes it more palatable for me.
Right.
So that's why I'm embracing that.
So that's
And
less
the-
about making it perfect and more about just accessing your creative side.
Yes, very much so for me.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm just giving you a hard time about that. I mean,
Yeah.
but yeah, and then it's you know, and I think we all have our places where we're gonna try and aim for more perfection or more stuff. So, like for you, it's the way you lay out your plate. For me, it might be how I, you know, sit down and do crafts, like the order I do things or stuff. So I get it. I do understand that, and I know. I've still got to break some of these OCD habits, but like locking my car twice before I come inside, that's a whole other project. But yeah, and it's not, I don't know. I think it also has to do with the people around us in the ways of like who's influencing us and who's like the cool thing for me is I don't have anybody living with me. So for me, I can just make dinner and have it look however I want because it's just me. If somebody else was here, I might do it a little differently. So there's an influence that kind of comes in, which then kind of leads to like having to be mindful of what are we just doing for us and what's an OCD or what's a perfection issue and what's just our nature, you know?
So maybe T, you could talk about that a little bit. How do we differentiate those? Like, I liked what you said because you picked up on the fact that I was actually trying to be creative in this instant and not perfection. What are some of the cues? What are some of the things we can do to pick up on those things?
What are we feeling just before and just after?
Ooh, I like that.
Yeah.
So what are we getting out of the behavior? Are we
I'm
responding
writing
to
that
a
one
fear?
down.
Are we responding to a fear or an anxiety, or are we seeking to express ourselves? So, for example, EJ, with locking your car twice tells me that there's an anxiety there. There's a fear there that something bad will happen if you don't do it twice. And if you walk away doing it only once, your anxiety is likely to increase. And you have
That's
to
100% true.
And typically with those type of things, as a counselor, often what we'll do is make you sit with that anxiety and then evaluate, am I safe right now? Am I okay right now? Right now, not what can happen, not what could happen, but right now. So that's the biggest difference to me.
I like that. So what are we feeling before and after? I like that. That was beautiful. Perfect.
Yep.
It happens occasionally.
Way more than occasionally. Just gonna let you know. Got to build you up, you know. All right. So I feel like we've really identified, you know, some of the issues, and we've talked about, you know, some ways to deal with that. I would say also one of the things that I've learned this year, I've really been engaging in a process called mindfulness. You know, T or not T, EJ, you kind of referenced it in that you were talking about the, you know, the balls and the off center and all that, and we both mentioned it, but really we're seeking that center, we're seeking balance. And when we engage, which, you know, I'm not gonna lie, I really was one of those people that was like, this is foo-foo and this is, you know, I remember, oh gosh, remember your friend Nate And, you guys had the office a while back and I was working there, and he was helping out with my first chronic illness group that I facilitated. And he wanted us to go through this whole mindfulness thing. Oh man, I'm telling you, I was like, this is a waste of time. This is ridiculous. I really was not exactly what you would call open. So it was amazing that his techniques and the things that he did with me got through anyway. First of all, he's such a caring, fun, great guy. But we did this thing where we put one bite of something in our mouth. We had our eyes closed and we had to really taste it and think about it and what do we like? What did we not? What were the textures? What all of these things? It ended up being the most amazing experiential thing that I went through. And I'm learning in mindfulness to apply that in so many areas. And I think that has really helped me kind of soften, tone it down. I mean, I am a perfectionist. It's not just going to go away, but I can get a hold of it and I can not let it affect me and impact those around me so negatively by getting a grasp on myself and my feelings and my centeredness. So
I think the reason mindfulness is such an important topic to what we're talking about, first of all, I want to acknowledge that I tend to be the same way about anything meditation oriented. I have a hard time with it. And I find a lot of my clients do too, because doing mindfulness or meditation requires you to feel like you can be safe. And a lot of people are like, there's no such thing. So that's one of the first hurdles I have to get people over with the concept. But the idea behind mindfulness is no judgment. You have to capture the moment with no judgment on it, just an awareness that it's there. And there's no room for no judgment and perfection.
Oh, you're so right. So right. I just wrote, my counselor wanted me to work on some goals and some things. And I wrote in there, when I get to this specific weight that I'm trying to get to, because I would like to be able to have my knee replacement and be able to get on the transplant list and all of these things. So I did write in the goal, it said, when I get to this goal, whether I stay there or not, I want to be okay with it. And I don't want to think about it as good or bad. And that's huge for me to be able to, even write that down. Mm-hmm. And I could definitely see growth and definitely see a more open-minded attitude towards, yes, have a goal, meet it, reach it, but then it's not the end all be all. As you said, it's not all or nothing. And I do want to embrace that idea of no judgment, because most of my life, all I feel about is judgment, judgment by others, judgment on myself, judgment in every corner of my mind.
Well, who decides who wins the Olympics? Judges.
Judges. Mm-hmm.
So to win, to achieve, so we're assuming someone's judging us.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. It, like I said, is very much ingrained in our culture and society. Mm-hmm. It's not surprising that we just had this absolute meltdown on national television, right, with all these different perspectives.
I personally think competition is healthy. I think we need competitions.
Right.
I personally do not agree with participation awards.
I don't either.
However, that being said, we do need to redefine how we judge ourselves, and we need to redefine what is the criteria that we're judging ourselves on. And
I
then
like that.
how much importance we're putting on our achievements.
Amen.
So that's what's happening to some of our athletes, is that there's so much hanging on their achievements that if they stop achieving, they stop living.
Mm,
And
that's powerful.
so, I mean, like I said, competition is healthy. I think that helps motivate us. It helps motivate change. It helps do all these things. But I think we need to decide what our role in those competitions are.
Well said. Well said.
Amen.
Well, I think we've wrapped it up.
Just a friendly reminder that anything discussed in this podcast is not to be used as a diagnosis or a replacement for conversations with your own doctors, therapists, psychologists, or other medical professionals. This episode is available on Anchor, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and more. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram as BehindTheMaskPC. If you don't use social media, you can email us at BehindTheMaskPC@gmail.com. Feel free to review us on Anchor, leave feedback on the platform you listen to us on, or message us through our social media or email, because we'd love to hear what you think. If there's a topic you'd like to hear us talk about, feel free to message us and we'll see about making it happen. You can find EJ on Twitter and Instagram as EJ8302. And if you'd like to keep these episodes coming, you can monetarily support us by visiting anchor.fm/BehindTheMaskPC/support. And on behalf of the ladies and myself, thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.